want to introduce two real friends of this conference, co-sponsors of this conference, Ed Tick and Kate Dahlstedt, who are together both psychologists with Soldier's Heart in Troy, New York. They have made a career of healing, have been involved in really addressing the unhealed wounds of the Vietnam War and all of our other wars. Ed is the author of the award-winning book, War in the Soul. It is a book which, if you have not read, you have to pick up while you're here or buy on Monday morning. Well worth your reading. It will change the way you think about veterans and about war. And I believe Ed and Kate, in speaking to you, will change the way you think about it. One of the things which they have done, which they will describe, is that they have been engaged in journeys of reconciliation, taking Vietnam veterans back to Vietnam, where some men and women have expressed the fact that it was not until that trip, that journey of reconciliation, that they actually felt whole and returned to the selves that they were before being exposed to war. It is with a great deal of pleasure and gratitude for their co-sponsorship that I introduce Ed and Kate.
Well, good evening. Good evening. And it's wonderful to be with all of you. And it's wonderful that this conference is being convened for such a critical topic as we are all concerned with and addressing together. Before we enter into the content that we're all concerned about, we have a very brief ceremonial opening of our conference. It is of utmost importance, of course, that we frame our conference at beginning and end with community, with compassion, with spirituality, especially in a beautiful retreat setting like this. And we have learned from our Native American brothers and sisters and from other traditions that have worked well and successfully with their warriors in the warrior tradition before, during, and after service, that there are many, many more things we can do and we should be doing for our military personnel and our veterans. And when we, one of the efforts that we're involved with in Soldier's Heart is studying the warrior traditions from all over the world to see how other cultures today and also from other times and places nurtured and tended their warriors before, during, and after their deployments, such that the terrible problems we have of the visible and invisible woundings from war and the after effects and how they spill over into family, community, and our entire society can actually be reduced. And ultimately, if we design and implement our work correctly, we can greatly reduce the suffering and the cost to everyone, each individual, and to society. So one of the things the Native Americans teach us about gatherings and about warrior tradition. Well, how many people have been to powwows? Okay. It looks like about a third or half of us. That's great. Powwow always opens with a prayer, with an invocation to the divine, and always follows that with warriors processional, because the warriors are those in the community who have put their lives on the line for everyone else. And so we open this conference and we open all of our work in this manner. The prayer we've chosen to open this conference is one that we know you're all familiar with. However, you may not know it's a warrior's prayer. So how many people, well, do we all know the peace prayer of St. Francis? Yes, everybody knows that. How many of us knew St. Francis was a warrior? Okay. Well, a handful, and that's good. Now we all know it. This prayer actually comes to us from two warriors, and we'd like to briefly tell you the story and then recite the prayer as our divine invocation for the spiritual energy and support we all need to share to do this work. St. Francis had a very similar early life history to many, many veterans throughout all the ages and to our vets today. At about age 20 years old, we know that he was in conflict with his family, that they were affluent middle-class merchants of the time, And Francis did not want to follow in their footsteps, didn't want to become a merchant, and he wanted to experience the great adventure of his times, as youth always do. And so at about age 20, he went off to war. He served in combat for about a year. He was taken prisoner, relevant to our conference, so he was a prisoner of war for about another year. He was ransomed and brought home, and what do you know? He didn't fit in. He was even in more conflict with his parents and his community, really didn't want to be there, was angry at lies and being misled by authority. And so, in not being able to fit in as a combat veteran, he did what so many of our veterans today do. He re-enlisted, he re-upped and went off for a second combat deployment. During that second deployment, he did have a spiritual crisis and breakdown and vision that told him to go home and drop his affluence and put on the robes, the pauper's robes that we know he wore for the rest of his life, and serve the poor, the needy, the ill, and the veterans, the traumatized veterans of his time, and also to confront authority. So he's left us many beautiful prayers. But he didn't leave us this one. The St. Francis prayer actually comes to us from an unknown soldier of World War I. It was found stuck in, written on the back of a St. Francis prayer card that some soldier had carried and kept in the trenches and composed this prayer in the trenches and stuck the prayer into his Bible. And a chaplain found the Bible in a muddy trench and the prayer card inside. And this chaplain had the love and vision to make tens of thousands of copies in many languages and circulated among all of the troops that could possibly be reached in World War I. So the peace prayer of St. Francis comes to us from two veterans, our saint, our beloved saint, and also one of our unknown soldiers. And when we realize that this is a warrior's prayer, it adds depth and meaning because it shows the degree of spiritual vision and compassion and love and forgiveness that can come from the military and the war experiences. And that is, in our organization, what we work for. We work for the transformation of our warriors from being brokenhearted to carrying their soldier's heart, from feeling like discarded, traumatized, wounded people to evolve into elder spiritual warriors with visions like St. Francis, such that the military experience has great meaning, and we help our veterans turn back to continue to bring us wisdom and compassion and give service to our society and world. So with that brief introduction, if you know it, please recite it with us. The peace prayer of St. Francis of Assisi and the unknown soldier. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.
We would like to honor the veterans that are here today. So anybody who's currently serving, stand up, please, first of all. Okay. Anybody else? And others that have served in the past, please stand. Let's the rest of us behold you and give you honor. Thank you. Now I'm going to ask that you stay standing for a moment. And I'm going to also ask that any wife or former wife or girlfriend please stand. Okay. Or husband, too, for that matter. And any children of veterans? Mm-hmm. Any grandchildren of veterans? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Siblings of veterans? Grandparents of veterans or parents of veterans? Friends? Neighbors? Aunts, uncles, cousins? Extended family? There you go. And look around. Just about, I think, is there anybody sitting? Okay. So everybody in this room has been connected to somebody who served in the military. And yet, how often do we ever talk to each other about that? Hardly at all. So we do this exercise, and every single time it's just like this. So what I'm trying to say, and what we're trying to point out, you can sit down now, is that war and military experience affects all of us. And one of the things that we focus on in Soldier's Heart is that it's not about the veterans and the civilians, but actually it's all about all of us. We are all impacted, whether we served or whether we were on the home front, whether we had loved ones who served or whether we were there ourselves. It doesn't matter. I mean, it matters in some ways because of the differences in our experience, but we are all impacted by war. And so when we do our retreats, we don't do veterans retreats or veteran healing retreats. We do war healing retreats. And people just like you who may or may not have served, anybody's welcome to come and participate in our activities, because it's really something we're all in together, and the only way we're going to help our veterans is if all of us work on the solutions. So thank you very much.
I have the honor of opening the conference with a few words. And I again thank you all for every form of service you give, for being here and caring, helping to guide our state and nation more wisely and justly than perhaps we've been able to achieve yet. But we are all in this together. And I thank First Fairfield and all of my wonderful colleagues for helping put this conference together. Very briefly, Kate and I are co-founders of Soldier's Heart, a not-profit organization. I've been working with veterans for 35 years, since the late 1970s, before post-traumatic stress disorder was even a modern diagnosis. That became a recognized diagnosis by the American Psychiatric Association in 1980. But as Gabriel indicated earlier, we have known of this wound since ancient times, and we know of more than 80 and about 90 names it's had in different time periods of history and different cultures. We adopted the name Soldier's Heart because warriors have broken hearts, because anyone who has seen participated in combat, seen the effects and the after effects of war, should have a broken heart. It's right. War hurts. And the hurt can last a lifetime and destroy lives. So our organization work with the military, we work with our veterans and families and communities all over the country to teach the lessons of warrior wisdom, to bring back warrior traditions for transformation and healing, and for developing an affirmative and constructive identity out of the military and veteran experience, such that our warriors keep growing and we have elders and teachers and people continuing to serve us through the life cycle rather than collapsing into disability, addictions, or being ignored and neglected. So I will just jump right in. I know we're going to have a lot of statistics this weekend, so I'm going to excuse myself from the beginning. I have pages and pages of statistics that we could discuss regarding the degree of challenge in the legal and criminal justice systems that our veterans face, but I'm not going to do that. I'll stay human and humanistic and just share stories and ideas, and we will collect each other's wisdom through the weekend. So I'd like to begin with a few lessons from ancient Greece. First, a quote that it has great wisdom, and I reflect on it a lot. Aeschylus was the first Greek tragedy writer. Aeschylus was also a combat veteran. He was at the Battle of Marathon. His brother was killed there. 2,500 years ago, Aeschylus said, "The first casualty of war is truth." The first casualty of war is truth. War is so horrible, so painful, so distorts our hearts and our souls and our minds and our societies, and we don't know how to deal with its aftermath, that truth just disappears. Our veterans carry their experiential truth, and we, the rest of us, rarely know that truth. And most of our systems, our healthcare and psychological healthcare and legal systems, don't get to the veterans' truth, the truth of the war experience and how it transformed people. Another lesson from ancient Greece. There was, in the Trojan War, there was the Greek warrior Ajax. Now, when Achilles was killed, Ajax and Odysseus were competing for his armor, which really represented honor. Ajax was dishonored in public and before his brothers in arms, before his peers. And being dishonored publicly to a warrior is so destructive that Ajax went mad, committed crimes, couldn't tell his friends from his enemies, fell into deep despair, and finally committed suicide. And this is not just a story. Honor is so important after serving in the fields of hell, that is truly what our veterans want and what all veterans want. And much of the fight over disabilities is because our society measures everything in financial terms. And we need to restore honor to the military and veteran experience, and not as well as struggle over questions of disability benefits and proper kinds of treatment. But lost honor can destroy a person, and especially can destroy someone who has tried to serve in the most honorable and demanding of all professions. Third lesson from ancient Greece is about honor. Pericles was the ruler of Athens during in the building of the Acropolis and during the Peloponnesian Wars. And over the dead of those wars, Pericles said, "It is honor and not gain that warms the heart in infirmity and disability and old age." Here too, a ruler during wartime said, the most important thing we can give to each other and give to our warriors is honor. So we are most concerned with giving honor, restoring honor, and working with our veterans who might be in trouble in ways that retain and restore lost honor. So, back to that first quote, the first casualty of war is truth. Well, many veterans and others who go through the legal system tragically feel that the first casualty of our legal system is truth. We have such difficulty in getting the story right when our system is designed to be adversarial and to punish people. So we have the question, when we apply this to our military and veterans, how do we represent the psychological, the moral, the cultural, and the spiritual truths about military service, war, and veterans, when the public knows very little, when much of the public doesn't care, when a commander-in-chief may say, go shopping and let our soldiers carry the burden all by themselves, when the military experience, when the systems that are meant to support our veterans, and when our legal systems are all designed to make truth very difficult to access and to act upon. The societal truth today is that neither the public nor most professionals really understand the military and war experiences, and how profoundly formative and influential they are. They shape life. We can spend 1 year overseas, and that 1 year deployment becomes bigger and more formative than the other 40, 50, 60, 70 years of life. And we need to understand that and understand the way we are transformed by these experiences. However, sometimes, too often, such experiences are discounted, may even be excluded from legal and court proceedings. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. As I said, I've been working with veterans for about 35 years, and I have several books and many articles out about it. I have studied and worked with the invisible wounds of war in cultures around the world, not just our home culture. And so, considered an expert in the field on post-traumatic stress, military post-traumatic stress disorder, I have been asked to serve as expert witness for the defense in many veteran cases. And I'd just like to name a few very briefly, just to show some of the stories that we all are probably familiar with, but how the military experience can lead to legal trouble, and then talk about what happens to some of those people when those cases get to court. So a few stories. The very first combat veteran I ever worked with was a man named Ron, who was drinking in a California bar literally 2 days out of combat in Vietnam. When he was short, he was pulled out of a firefight and put on a chopper, then put on the Freedom Bird. 48 hours later, he was in a bar. He still thought, his mind and his heart were operating as if he was still in combat. In the bar, somebody badmouthed our troops, called them names. He was still in his uniform. He just turned around and struck out and killed the man. He really was still operating as if he were in a firefight. He didn't see who it was. He just knew that he and his brothers were being attacked. He was put in prison for manslaughter. That was his welcome home. A veteran named Ralph, who was in Special Forces, came home to find his wife in bed with someone else. He immediately flashed into special operations combat behavior. He stalked them, he hunted them, he broke into his own house with his knife drawn, and in combat operations he was trained to do. Luckily, he didn't physically harm them, but he was imprisoned for assault with a deadly weapon. And again, I'll talk about what happened in court with some of these. Another case I was involved with, an Iraq veteran named Kevin was attacked on a street by a violent gang at night in the dark. He was all alone, and he too flashed immediately into his defensive hand-to-hand maneuvers. The assailants were armed, and he got a knife away from one of the assailants who was trying to stab him, and tragically, Kevin, in defending himself, stabbed and killed the assailant. He's now in prison for murder. Another veteran I worked with, also in Special Forces, he was in 3 tours in Iraq, including, during his tours, he actually halted an atrocity. He stopped his squad from going overboard and killing civilians when they lost it. Kevin kept his cool as a soldier and behaved well and morally downrange. He came back to Fort Lewis, Washington, and was fed drugs by some of his comrades. He was robbed, and then he exploded. Everything that he had held in through 3 tours in Iraq exploded on his base when he was drugged and betrayed by some of his comrades. So these are just a few examples of the types of people I've worked with and who have had challenges in the legal system. We could talk about the massive suicide rates, the violent crimes, the incarceration rates, as Gabriel rightly said, the presence of substance abuse in so many veteran cases, how high it is and how dominant it is, and that the use of substances is high in the military and very high after time in the combat zone. We all know about marital troubles and difficulties and divorce rates, multiple marriages, and other symptoms of what we call today post-traumatic stress disorder, anger and aggression and domestic violence and rages and sleep disorders. They're all rampant. All of these are conditions that result from service, can result, not necessarily, but can result from service in the military and especially from service in the combat zone. And all of those, of course, will twist the trajectory of a life out of shape, and without the right response and tending, welcome, and support from our society, these psychological and psychospiritual tendencies easily distort the personality and drive them toward dangerous behaviors. So we're working together to understand the truth of the military and veteran experience and the conflicts that sometimes arise with society. So a few truths that I would like us to consider. One is that the public and professionals in general deny the truth about how challenging, how difficult, and how transformative of character and values the military and veteran and combat experiences are. We also deny how debilitating military and combat experiences can be. Not necessarily, but quite often. And as we said earlier, what we call PTSD today has accompanied war and violence since ancient times. They go together. War hurts and damages and breaks us all into pieces, and we will feel different and be different afterwards. We also don't understand and tend to ignore the positive transformations that happen from military service and all the good and strong and proper values of sacrifice, of discipline, of giving to things greater than ourselves, of serving the society rather than just ourselves. Our veterans carry very, very good values that our country stands for and our military tries to foster, but because of the way we do it and the way we use our military and veterans or misuse it, these good values often become distorted, become lost, and our veterans are lost and wandering and angry, hurting, or living in a vacuum rather than being seen for who they are and what they have to offer us. We also deny the impact of military training. Military training has become extremely brutal, and more so as we try to reduce the human inhibition against killing and make fewer and fewer people into more and more effective killing machines. So training is brutal, and our veterans are programmed for it and under duress at home. As with the cases I mentioned, the training just turns on. It's a reaction. It's an immediate and conditioned reaction that our vets are supposed to have when they're in danger. So we've heard this many times, we all know this, but we always have to remember it. What is legal and necessary in the war zone is illegal and immoral at home. But we don't help our veterans learn how to turn off those reactions or transform them into something different, something useful. So we actually have millions of people millions of Americans who have been trained to kill. without guidance on how not to use the killing arts. Many, many veterans, of course, can carry and contain that training and those killing arts, but some can't, and under threat or stress, they will just turn on. That's how a soldier is trained to behave. We also deny the impact of the neglect of adequate support during deployment. So our troops and vets feel alone out there, very alone and unsupported, and go through their transformations without enough support to help normalize them, their experience. And we also deny the neglect of the necessary homecoming process. In traditional cultures, combat veterans didn't just quickly and immediately go home. The goal was not to get them home as soon as possible. There are many lessons, including in the Bible, about how to treat combat veterans after service such that they come home safely and well. The Bible, for example, in Numbers and Deuteronomy, there are many, many dictates about proper return of veterans. But just one example. Combat troops, according to Mosaic law, are supposed to have a week of purification and isolation after battle before returning to their communities and their families. Because, just like my first vet, Ron, 2 days back and he is still in combat internally, even if his body is back here in the States. Well, 3,000 years ago, the ancients said, you can't do this. You can't be in battle one day and then just go home. You need downtime, purification time, time with the chaplains, the holy people of your community, to really integrate and what happened and digest it and allow the heat of combat to quiet down. So, in some of the cases I've worked with where our vets have gotten into trouble with the law, charges that we've had to work on have been assault and battery, breaking and entering, assault with a deadly weapon, illegal weapons possessions, destruction of property, substance abuse charges, sale of military equipment, smuggling military equipment back into the U.S. for private use, and murder. Every one of these illegal actions by veterans I've worked with at home were either legal and encouraged in the war zone, or at least commonplace and tolerated. All of them. So the vets often complain that what I am trained and equipped to do, what is legal downrange, is illegal and immoral at home, but no one retrained me, no one rehumanized me, no one helped me learn how to turn off my combat responses. Now, in every case I've been involved with, and we hope veteran courts and trust veteran courts, and as we continue to enlighten each other, this will change. But in my career so far, in every case I've been involved with, prosecutors have stuck strictly to the legal codes and to the facts of the incident. Prosecutors and often the judges have denied the impact of the military and combat experiences on the personality or the actions of the defendants. In most of the cases I was involved with, the judges ruled, and sometimes even predetermined, that military psychological history and evidence were irrelevant to the case, irrelevant to the crime. In some of these cases, the military history and psychological evaluations of its impact were not even permitted into the courtroom as evidence or as education of the jury and judge as a friend of the court. However, in contrast to that, and to what happened in the courtrooms, in every one of these cases, I've spent many, many days with each veteran, carefully evaluating his or her military history their lives and their personalities before service, what happened to them during service, and what their lives were like after, and what impact did their military service and training have upon the crime. In every case, now this is my professional responsibility, I have to establish to a significant degree of professional confidence that there really is influence, psychological impact here. Now, in every case that I'm mentioning, I was able to establish to this degree of professional confidence that from the psychological perspective, military training and experience had kicked in, turned on, either before and or during the crime from stress, danger, threat, confusion, no time at home, no help returning, whatever was coming at the veteran from outside. Military training and experience kicked in such that the defendant was operating according to proper military procedure for self-protection and protection of his unit in the combat zone and the completion of the mission. So, for the vet, it can be as if the criminal circumstance were actually a combat zone operation. And often, if the time is short or if the veteran is in a flashback because they're seeing weapons and danger and it's night in a dark alley, the veteran can't tell the difference. They're not seeing what's here now. They're seeing themselves in a combat situation and responding appropriately. They don't even know they're on an American street. So excluding military history, excluding expert testimony on it, renders the veteran's story incomplete and incomprehensible. Then the veteran becomes stereotyped and victimized, and it is as if we assume the veteran is a dangerous and disturbed person roaming the street who is a danger to society, who may explode in violence in unpredictable ways. And this reinforces a very negative public perception, such that the public in general has negative stereotypes of our veterans and fears them. Now, we all know that there are many both visible and invisible wounds of war, and that the invisible wounds of war are in epidemic proportions. Post-traumatic stress disorder, military sexual trauma, traumatic brain injury, and these have profound impacts on behavior. With these wounds, homecoming is extremely, extremely difficult. And we inherit the condition that our veterans return to us with great and legitimate needs, but missing realities. Let's remember back to ancient Greece, Odysseus, who was away at the Trojan War for 10 years, it took 10 years for him to travel home. And he went through all of the challenges in mythology that our veterans go through today. The road home is a very long and arduous one. And it is critical for us to realize, in context of our concern at this conference, that whatever treatment our veteran gets by the legal and the criminal justice systems is, in fact, part of the homecoming. If I get in trouble and I've just gotten home, whatever my homeland does to me, however it treats me, is going to be part of my homecoming. So if the legal system treats me in a punishing and insensitive way, that sets up further exclusion, betrayal, abandonment, alienation, when what we need is inclusion, support, compassion, and tending. This amounts to a betrayal trauma, and it is a trauma on top of trauma that may have already happened at war, and many, many of our veterans say that the trauma upon homecoming was actually worse than what I experienced in combat. One veteran said, "I left America to fight for my country, but when I returned, I found that America had left me." We can't, and some of our veterans are nodding in recognition of that feeling. We must, in every one of our social institutions, respond to our veterans and treat them as if they're coming home. They gave great service, difficult service, and home has to be a welcoming and compassionate place, even if there are legal and criminal difficulties and challenges in the return. So, we need to ask the question, what is needed from the public in general and from our justice systems so that we understand and treat our veterans accurately, fairly, and with compassion and with honor, and especially when they get into trouble? So I've got a laundry list, and it really amounts to more than tweaking our broken system already, but really asking for all of us to participate in quite significant social change. We need a holistic and comprehensive understanding of the invisible wounds of military service and war. We need, regarding post-traumatic stress disorder, to understand it is not just a stress and anxiety disorder, not just a traumatic wounding, but in fact a complete identity transformation. The veteran's deep mind still operates as if it's in the combat zone, and the veteran's identity is different than the civilian identity and will be different for the rest of our lives. So our veterans are not home when they have physically returned, but homecoming, as we've said, is a long and complex process that needs time and extensive tending. And legal, abusive, criminal, or violent behaviors are problems that inevitably occur in the absence of adequate homecoming. So we need to really study and invigorate and reinstitute a complete and holistic homecoming process for anybody who has served. And if we did that, we could avoid chronic PTSD and greatly reduce the problems of the legal problems our veterans face. We also need unity and will by all parties involved in the proceedings, including the prosecutors. We need to comprehend a veteran psychology and realize that it is different than civilian psychology, and that this is especially true of combat veterans, and that how combat veterans are behaving under threat is consistent with their military training and experience. We need to remember that what is expected, necessary, and rewarded in the combat zone is criminal at home, but we haven't helped our veterans make that transition and deprogram so that they don't operate as if they're still in the combat zone. We also need to understand that military training is intensive and permanent. We do not yet have rehumanizing processes that help our veterans transform back into civilians. We leave that up to the individuals. And in fact, it may be impossible. It is impossible because once a warrior, always a warrior, and that new identity will be with our veterans forever. So rather than trying to help our veterans become well-adjusted civilians again and forget the veteran experience, we have to have an enlarged identity, that there are, among our veterans, there are warriors among us. And we have to recognize that identity and its psychology and its place in society and work with them. We have to help our veterans develop this new identity as elder returned warriors, include their military experiences and the values that guide them. We also must, when we turn to the legal challenges, we must include the influence of military history in our cases, in our case evaluations. We must. It's absurd to say somebody who had 3 deployments downrange and has only been home for a few months and is attacked on the street by armed assailants shouldn't act like a combat veteran under attack. You can't not. And we can't assume that. We really have to get the whole story and have the whole story told through our legal proceedings. We also must seek alternatives to conventional punishment. We can and must offer forms of service that are consistent with military tradition and experiences, again, that restore the veteran and retain honor and are of benefit to society. We need our judges, lawyers, and chaplains and mental health professionals on teams together, as some vet courts are doing around the country, to serve as a team seeking all of these positive and restorative qualities rather than acting as adversaries seeking either release or punishment. But rather, we need to be a team saying, this person served our country, now how, as a team, can we serve the veteran and also make what went wrong right for the veteran and the victims. And this is some of why we desperately need vet courts and are celebrating that the vet courts have become a significant movement in our society. So rather than quick discharge from the military and our veterans having to go it alone until perhaps they make it or get into trouble, we need to provide full homecoming practices that include everything a veteran needs and everything that other cultures and traditional cultures gave their warriors. These included tending, purification, acceptance, education into new roles, rehumanizing processes, storytelling to the public, shared grieving, public acceptance of responsibility for the warrior's actions, initiation into a new and honorable social status that includes ways to continue serving our society and serving other veterans. That's what our vets are looking for. Now, when there is indeed inner wounding and an incomplete homecoming, again, rather than punishment, we may sometimes need to separate and sequester some of our veterans who are suffering very much or who tend toward trouble. So we can turn our sequestering institutions, instead of jails and prisons to punish our veterans, into houses of initiation to complete the homecoming process. And those houses of initiation can include all kinds of positive dimensions of re-education, of community service, of restoration, practicing restorative justice. And through education, therapeutics, and restorative service, we can then complete that initiation and transformation, and the vets don't have to do it themselves. So with all these means, we can restore that first casualty of war, truth. Our justice systems can and must represent and defend truth, and this defense of truth must include understanding, representing, and defending our veterans after they have gone through the most profound and difficult of life experiences for us and in our names. So in conclusion, we'll have our panel in a moment. I would like to just address these closing words to our vets and our troops, to all those who are serving us now. You know, we're so worried about your wounds and the problems, the troubles, the suffering they cause you and our society. But let's look at the positive dimensions of being wounded. Remember the wounded healer. One of my brothers who was in Special Forces for several decades said, I have finally come to understand that the end of the warrior's journey ends when the warrior becomes a healer. Our veterans have so much wisdom, so many higher values to bring to us. Every one of them deserves the best and the highest from us in order to bring restoration and bring the warriors home and continue to serve. So my blessing and my prayer for our troops and veterans present and for all is this. Without your wounds, where would your power be? The very angels themselves cannot persuade the wretched and blundering children of the earth, as can one human being who has been broken in the wheels of living. In love's service, only the wounded soldiers can serve. To our veterans, we need you, we love you, we honor you, and to all the rest of us, let's do right by them and fix our broken system so that we're not punishing, but bringing them all the way home. Thank you and bless you all.